Tom Holland had always loved returning to London. It was his hometown, after all, and whenever he got the chance to escape from his hectic filming schedule, he'd take it. This time, it was different. He wasn't here for a movie premiere or a big event, just a quiet, personal weekend. Away from the cameras, away from the public eye, it was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, a few days to recharge before heading back to the spotlight. He didn't choose one of the fancy hotels he usually stayed at. No, this time, Tom wanted something low-key, something that wouldn't attract attention. After some research, he found an old, charming hotel in a quieter part of the city. It wasn't popular with tourists, but that's exactly what made it perfect. Or so he thought. Before we dive deeper into this chilling story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on these eerie tales of real-life experiences from your favorite celebrities. Let's continue. Tom had found the hotel after hours of scrolling through options online. It wasn't well known, but its vintage charm caught his eye. The website showed pictures of a quiet, quaint building, tucked away from the busy streets of London. It seemed perfect for someone who wanted a break from all the attention. Someone like him. The reviews were sparse, but the few that were there spoke about the hotel's history and unique atmosphere. That didn't bother Tom. He appreciated places with character, and this one seemed to have plenty. He called the hotel to make a reservation. The voice on the other end was polite, though strangely hesitant. They had rooms available, but when Tom mentioned the specific dates he wanted to stay, the receptionist paused. "Are you sure you want to come then? We've had some issues during those nights," the voice said softly. Tom, slightly puzzled, shrugged it off. He was used to hearing all sorts of odd things in his line of work and didn't give it much thought. With the reservation made, Tom felt a small thrill of excitement. A few days of peace in a beautiful old hotel sounded like exactly what he needed. But he couldn't shake the strange tone of the receptionist. What kind of issues could a hotel in a quiet part of town possibly have? When Tom arrived at the hotel, it was just as he had imagined, quiet, tucked away, and almost forgotten by time. The building had an eerie beauty to it, with its old brick walls and ivy crawling up the sides. As he stepped through the entrance, a chill ran down his spine, though he told himself it was just the cool London air. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, the kind of lighting that made everything look just a little older, a little more mysterious. The front desk was manned by an elderly woman who barely glanced up when Tom walked in. She had a strange, distant expression, as if she'd seen too many faces pass by to care anymore. When he gave her his name, she took a long pause before finally checking him in. No small talk, no smile, just a curt nod as she handed over the key to his room. On his way to the elevator, Tom passed another staff member, a young man carrying towels down the hall. When their eyes met, the man gave him a look, something like concern or even warning. It was brief, but unsettling. Tom brushed it off, thinking maybe he was reading too much into things. It had been a long day of travel, and his mind was playing tricks on him. As the elevator doors closed, Tom couldn't help but feel a slight unease creeping in. What was it about this place? The staff barely spoke, and the whole hotel had an odd, heavy silence that he couldn't shake. When Tom reached his room, the first thing he noticed was how cold it was. Not the typical London chill, but a deeper cold that seemed to seep into his bones. He shrugged it off, thinking the heating system must be old, just like everything else in the hotel. The room itself was modest. Simple furniture, an old wooden wardrobe, and a large mirror that dominated one wall. The mirror, with its heavy, ornate frame, immediately caught his attention. It looked like it belonged in another century, far older than the rest of the room. It made the atmosphere feel heavier, as if the room held onto the weight of the past. As he unpacked, the silence in the room grew more noticeable. There were no street sounds, no humming of hotel life, just a deep, unnatural quiet. Even the air felt still, as though it had been untouched for a long time. Tom found himself glancing at the mirror more than he meant to, feeling as though it was somehow watching him. But that was ridiculous, right? He moved to the window, hoping for a view of the street below to break the eerie silence. But when he pulled back the curtains, he was met with a brick wall. No view, no light, just a solid old wall. The feeling of being closed in settled over him, and for the first time since arriving, he felt a gnawing discomfort in the pit of his stomach. Tom tried to shake it off. It was just a room, just an old hotel. He had been through worse, he told himself. Yet, as he sat down on the bed and stared at the mirror once again, the room felt more unsettling by the second. There was something about it, something he couldn't quite explain, that made him feel watched. That night, Tom collapsed into bed, exhausted from the day's travels. As he lay there, trying to relax, the strange feeling from earlier still lingered in the back of his mind. The room was dead silent, almost too silent for a busy city like London. He eventually drifted off, but his sleep was restless, filled with odd, fragmented dreams he couldn't quite remember. Sometime in the middle of the night he awoke suddenly, feeling a strange sense of alertness. At first, he wasn't sure what had woken him. The room was completely dark, except for the faint moonlight filtering through the small gap in the curtains. He lay there for a moment listening, and then he heard it. Faint footsteps outside his door. They were slow, deliberate, like someone pacing just outside his room. He held his breath, waiting for the sound to pass. But it didn't. Instead, the footsteps seemed to stop right in front of his door. Tom's heart raced. He wasn't expecting visitors, and it was far too late for hotel staff to be walking around. After a few minutes of silence, he mustered up the courage to get out of bed and approach the door. He listened closely, but there was nothing. He glanced through the peephole, but the hallway was completely empty. Shaking his head, Tom tried to calm himself down. Maybe it was just another guest. The old floors probably made every sound louder than it actually was. He returned to bed, trying to push the thought out of his mind. But just as he was about to fall back asleep, he heard something else. Whispering. Faint, indistinct voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. He sat up quickly, trying to locate the source, but the whispers faded as soon as he focused on them. Now, fully awake, Tom couldn't ignore the unease settling over him. Something wasn't right about this place, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. Still, the rest of the night was spent tossing and turning, his mind unable to shake the feeling that he wasn't alone in that room. The next morning, Tom woke up feeling groggy, as though he hadn't slept at all. The strange events of the night before were still fresh in his mind, but he tried to shake them off, convincing himself it had been his imagination running wild. As he got up, his eyes were drawn once again to the large mirror on the wall. There was something about it that unsettled him, but he couldn't pinpoint why. It wasn't just its age or the heavy ornate frame, it was the way it seemed to command attention, as if daring him to look deeper into its reflection. While getting ready, Tom noticed something odd. In the mirror's reflection, he could see the room as it was, but there was something else, something that didn't belong. A shadow, just out of view, moving ever so slightly at the edge of the reflection. He spun around quickly, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. The room was empty. He turned back to the mirror, staring at it more intently. The shadow was gone, but the unease remained. Tom leaned in closer, his face inches away from the glass, trying to catch any sign of the strange figure he had seen. Was it a trick of the light? His tired mind playing games with him? Suddenly, the surface of the mirror seemed to ripple, just for a second, like a stone dropped into still water. Tom jumped back, his heart racing. He blinked, and the mirror returned to normal. No ripples, no shadows, just his own pale, shaken reflection staring back at him. He told himself it had to be fatigue or stress. He'd been pushing himself hard lately, and the old hotel's creepy atmosphere wasn't helping. But deep down, he knew there was something wrong with that mirror. Something he couldn't explain. And whatever it was, it seemed to be watching him. As the day wore on, Tom couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had settled in his gut. He tried to distract himself by going out, exploring the city, meeting a few friends, but in the back of his mind, the mirror and the events of the previous night lingered like a dark cloud. When he returned to the hotel later that evening, the atmosphere felt different. The air seemed heavier, the shadows longer. He pushed open the door to his room, and as soon as he stepped inside, the coldness hit him again. Sharper this time, almost suffocating. Everything in the room seemed normal until Tom looked in the mirror. There, standing in the reflection, was a figure. An old man, dressed in worn, tattered clothes, staring directly at him. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow, filled with a deep sorrow that sent a chill down Tom's spine. Tom spun around, but the room was empty. The old man wasn't there. He turned back to the mirror, and the figure remained, still staring, as if trapped within the glass. Frozen with fear, Tom took a step closer to the mirror. His breath caught in his throat as the figure's lips began to move, though no sound came out. The man's expression was one of desperation, as if trying to warn him. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, and the lights flickered. The man in the mirror's eyes widened, and he began to reach out, his hand pressing against the glass from the inside. The mirror seemed to vibrate, as if something was trying to break through. Panicked, Tom stepped back, not knowing what to do. Just then, a voice whispered from the corner of the room. "He's still here, waiting." Tom's blood ran cold. The voice didn't sound like his own thoughts. It was real, faint, but distinct. He whipped around to face the source, but no one was there. It was as if the very walls had spoken. The figure in the mirror suddenly vanished, leaving only Tom's wide-eyed reflection staring back at him. Shaken, he collapsed onto the bed, his mind racing. Who was that man? And what did he mean by waiting? Tom quickly searched online, desperate for answers. He came across an old news article buried deep in the web, mentioning a man who had stayed at the hotel years ago, a man who disappeared without a trace. Rumor had it he was last seen in the very room Tom was staying in. Whatever was happening, Tom knew it wasn't over. The spirit of that man wasn't just a reflection. He was still there, trapped in that room, trying to reach out. And Tom wasn't sure he could escape before the same thing happened to him. Determined to understand what he was dealing with, Tom couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The strange encounter with the man in the mirror was no hallucination. There was something far darker at play. He spent the next morning doing research, trying to uncover anything he could about the hotel's history. What he found sent a shiver down his spine. The hotel had been built in the late 1800s, originally intended as a luxurious retreat for wealthy travelers. However, it had fallen into disrepair over the decades, with stories of strange disappearances and inexplicable events clouding its reputation. Guests would check in, but some were never seen again. Most of these stories had been dismissed as urban legends, but the locals knew better. The hotel had a dark past, one that no amount of renovations could cover up. Tom discovered that the room he was staying in had an especially grim history. Several guests had reported seeing a man's figure in the mirror, just like he had. But what made it worse was that these guests had claimed they could hear him speaking, whispering warnings or asking for help. Each time, the hotel staff dismissed the complaints as figments of tired imaginations, brushing off the strange happenings as coincidence. But there was something deeper, a hidden tragedy tied to the room. In the early 1900s, a man had taken his own life there after losing his family in a terrible accident. His grief and despair were said to have left a permanent mark on the room, trapping his spirit within the walls and the mirror. And since then, anyone who stayed in the room was subject to his haunting presence, as if he was looking for someone to join him in his eternal loneliness. Tom's stomach turned as he read the accounts. The dark history of the hotel wasn't just a story. It was real, and he was living it. He began to question if staying another night was even an option. But something about the place had a hold on him, almost like it was daring him to leave, or tempting him to stay. That night, Tom braced himself for another round of strange occurrences. He tried to distract his mind by watching TV, but the eerie silence of the room crept in, making every sound seem distant. As the hours passed, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the room. Tom jumped, his heart racing. It sounded like something had fallen, but when he looked around, everything was in place. His eyes darted to the mirror, expecting to see the figure again, but this time the mirror was still. For a moment, he thought maybe the hotel's history was just getting to him. But then it happened. He felt it. Something cold brushing against his arm. It wasn't the drafty air from outside. It was like an icy hand grazing his skin. He jerked back, instinctively swiping at his arm, but there was nothing there. His breath quickened, and his heart pounded in his chest. Before he could process what had just happened, the bed beneath him suddenly creaked, as though something, or someone, was sitting down beside him. The pressure on the mattress was unmistakable, and Tom froze in place, fear gripping him. Slowly, he turned his head to look, but the bed appeared empty. And yet he could feel it, a presence so close he could almost hear its shallow breathing. Just as he was about to jump out of bed, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into brief moments of darkness. Tom felt a sharp tug on his leg, as though something was trying to pull him off the bed. He kicked back, scrambling to free himself, and in that moment the whispers returned, louder this time, almost deafening. They surrounded him, circling around his ears, unintelligible but terrifying. Panicked, Tom leaped out of bed and ran toward the door, only to find it stuck, as if something on the other side was holding it shut. He pounded on the door, desperately trying to open it, when the lights finally steadied and the whispers stopped. Breathing heavily, Tom managed to pull the door open and stumbled out into the hallway, his heart still racing. He didn't care about the stares from other guests. He knew now, without a doubt, that he wasn't alone in that room. Whatever haunted that place was real, and it wasn't finished with him yet. Tom couldn't shake the events of the previous night. The physical encounters, feeling something brush against him, the bed moving under an unseen weight, left him shaken to his core. He debated leaving the hotel, but the idea of running away from whatever was haunting him felt cowardly. He had to face it. He needed answers. That evening, he decided to spend one last night in the room, determined to uncover the truth. He braced himself, mentally preparing for whatever would come next. As night fell and the hotel grew quieter, a heavy stillness settled over the room. Tom sat on the edge of the bed, waiting, watching, ready for whatever would happen. The mirror, once again, captured his attention, but this time, he didn't see just the reflection of the room. In the mirror, there was movement, shadows shifting behind him. He quickly turned around, but there was nothing there. The room was still, empty. His breathing quickened as he slowly turned back to the mirror. The shadows were gone, but he could still feel them, lurking just out of sight. Suddenly, he felt a cold presence behind him. It was as though someone was standing directly over his shoulder, breathing down his neck. He spun around, but there was nothing, just the silence, thick and suffocating. Then it happened. A voice, low and guttural, whispered his name from behind. Tom. His heart stopped. It was the same voice he had heard the night before. The one that had whispered from the corner of the room. The same one that had warned him. He felt his body freeze, unable to move as the cold, oppressive air seemed to thicken around him. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping him inside. The lights flickered wildly, casting long, erratic shadows across the room. Tom's breathing grew heavier, his chest tightening with fear. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as though they were circling around him, closing in. Without thinking, Tom bolted toward the door, tearing at the handle with all his strength. But it wouldn't budge. His pulse raced as the temperature in the room dropped even further, and he could see his breath fogging in the air. The voice returned, louder now, right next to his ear. "Leave, before it's too late." Tom's mind raced. Was it too late? Was he already trapped like the others who had disappeared? Was the man in the mirror still waiting for him? With one final, desperate push, he managed to wrench the door open and ran into the hallway, his body trembling with terror. He didn't look back. He didn't dare. As Tom fled the hotel that night, he never returned. He couldn't forget what had happened, what he had felt. But the question lingered. Was he just the latest in a long line of guests to encounter the hotel's dark force, or was there something more waiting for him? Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted down the narrow hotel hallway, barely daring to look over his shoulder. The air felt thick and suffocating, as if something unseen was closing in on him, chasing him down the corridor. Every step he took echoed in the silence of the hotel, each footfall a reminder that the hotel's grip on him wasn't ready to let go. He reached the staircase, his legs aching with the effort of running. The coldness followed him, like an invisible force that seemed to cling to his every move. He didn't dare stop to look back. Every instinct in him screamed to get out, to leave before whatever was haunting him could catch him. Tom burst through the front door of the hotel, barely noticing the startled looks of the few late-night guests still in the lobby. Without a second thought, he ran into the street, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The familiar streets of London, once comforting, now seemed foreign to him. His mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened. The strange whispers, the unsettling mirror, the figure in the reflection. As he stumbled into the night, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was following him, even though he couldn't see it. His escape hadn't been enough to free him. The hotel, its history and its darkness had left their mark on him. He didn't stop running until he reached his hotel's front entrance, pulling himself together. He wasn't sure what to make of what had happened, but he knew he would never return to that place. And somehow, he was certain that the spirit of the man, the one who had been trapped in the hotel's dark history, would always be waiting for him, no matter how far he ran. If you found Tom's escape as terrifying as his experience in the hotel, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more spine-chilling stories like this one. Stay safe and never forget, some spirits are harder to outrun than you think. Days passed after Tom's desperate escape, but the lingering fear refused to leave him. He tried to go back to his normal life, attending interviews, filming for his latest project, meeting friends. But no matter how hard he tried, His mind kept drifting back to the hotel. The coldness, the whispers, and especially the mirror. It all replayed in his head like a haunting nightmare that wouldn't fade. Whenever he walked past reflective surfaces, he found himself glancing nervously into them, half expecting to see the man from the mirror again. His reflection always seemed different now, almost like a shadow of the person he used to be. It was as if that presence, the spirit he had encountered, had followed him, clinging to his every step. He even started to question his own sanity. Was it all just a bad dream? Or had something truly supernatural happened? His rational mind told him to move on, to forget the terror he'd felt, but deep down, he knew he couldn't. The fear remained, tucked away in the back of his mind. Every time he entered a room with a mirror, he wondered, was the man still there, waiting for him? Would he return one day, reaching through the glass to drag him back to the hotel's dark grip? Tom knew one thing for sure. Some experiences, no matter how hard you try to forget, stay with you forever. And for him, the hotel's dark history would never truly let him go. If this story made you question what's lurking behind your own reflections, make sure to subscribe for more stories that will keep you looking over your shoulder. Stay safe out there.